Hello everyone, I'm Justin, and this is everything you need to know before watching Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, releasing June 30th. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. The Indiana Jones franchise began all the way back in 1981 with the Raiders of the Lost Ark, when Harrison Ford, the actor in the franchise's titular role, was just 40. And now, 42 years later, the franchise will come to an end with its fifth and final film, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So, in preparation for the new film, we're going to take a look back at everything that Indy has gone through on the big screen so far, which won't include the character's television series from the 90s titled The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, as it doesn't provide any information that's that important to someone just concerned with the films. Before continuing on with our video though, make sure, if you haven't already, to go watch each of the franchise's previous 4 installments, which will be listed in the description so you can enjoy them for yourself. But if you have seen them and are just looking for a quick refresher, then you've come to the right place. To begin, let's jump back to 1912 Utah, as it's the earliest point in time we're introduced to Indiana Jones, real name Henry Jones Jr., who we see as a young man on an expedition in Arches National Park as a member of the Boy Scouts of America, during which he, along with his friend Herman Mueller, stumbles upon a group of thieves looting the caves in search of an ancient artifact called the Cross of Coronado, which they eventually find, and Indy, upon recognizing the artifact and believing it should be in a museum and not in the hands of these criminals, tells Herman to run back and inform their scoutmaster, Mr. Havelock, of the men they found and for him to bring the sheriff, while Indy steals the cross from and attempts to outrun the thieves, which he appears to successfully do as he makes it back to his house, where he attempts to get the attention of his father, Henry Jones Sr., so he can show him what he'd found. But his father's too occupied with something else to care, and Indy's soon forced to give the cross back up anyway by the sheriff, who claims that the thieves are the rightful owners of the artifact, and once having regained possession of it, the thieves then turn it over to their client, a man wearing a Panama hat. The leader of this group of thieves, Garth though, admires Indy's courageous attempt and decides to give him some words of encouragement, along with his hat, which Indy continues wearing throughout the adventures of his we see when he grows into an adult. The first of them beginning in 1935 Shanghai, as Indy meets with Chinese gangster Lao She, who he'd previously agreed to find the ashes of the first emperor of the Manchu dynasty, Nurhaci, for, in exchange for the Peacock's Eye, a diamond that once belonged to Alexander the Great. But that agreement was ultimately proven futile when Lao, unwilling to give the diamond up, sent his son, Cao Khan, to steal the ashes from Indy once they'd been found. But Cao ended up failing in his attempt and instead left it with one less finger. So, Indy now looks to resolve things at Lao's nightclub, Club Obi-Wan, by delivering the ashes to and forcing him to turn over the Peacock's Eye by threatening to kill the club's musical performer and Lao's apparent current lover, Willie Scott, which appears to work. And once having finally received the diamond, Indy takes a sip of his drink, but it's quickly revealed to have been poisoned by Lao. So, with the only antidote being in his possession, Indy's forced to turn the diamond back over to him in exchange for it. But once getting the diamond back, Lao decides against handing over the antidote, resulting in a huge brawl, throughout which Indy follows after the antidote while Willie Scott attempts to collect the diamond for herself. But she only manages to collect the antidote, so Indy forces her to come with him as they hop into his getaway vehicle, driven by his young companion Wan Li, also known as Short Round, who we later learn Indy had first met when he caught Shorty attempting to pickpocket him. After a bit of a chase, the trio managed to escape Lao and his men and make it to the airport, where they meet with Indy's contact, Art Weber, who's managed to get them seats on an airplane full of live poultry, although this plane, unbeknownst to Indy, actually belongs to Lao, who, while they're airborne above India, sets up for their pilots to abandon them mid-flight. The three still manage to avoid crashing and burning alongside the plane though, by successfully jumping out of it on a raft, on which they're eventually found by an old man who directs them to his village, which, it's revealed, believes the trio had been sent down from the sky by their deity Shiva to help them find their sacred stone, one of the 5 all-powerful Shankara stones, which they call Sivalinga, as it had recently been stolen along with the village's children by an evil from Pankot Palace, which Indy believed to have been deserted since the 1850s. But the old man claims Pankot has gained the power of the dark light once again. So, Indy, along with Shorty and a reluctant Willie, decides to head over to Pankot to see what's really going on, and upon their arrival, they're met by the Prime Minister of Pankot, Chatterlal, who appears, as well as the rest of Pankot, to be pretty normal, with him even inviting them in for dinner, during which we also meet Captain Philip James Blumbert of the 11th Puna Rifles, a British infantry unit responsible for patrolling Pankot. But it's eventually revealed later that night that something sinister is really going on, as Indy, while preparing to get it on with Willie, is attacked by an Indian guard, who he eventually manages to take out before heading into Willie's room and finding a secret passageway to an underground tunnel, through which the three travel and discover a gathering of the resurrected Thuggee cult, an organized gang of professional assassins based in India during the 13th to 19th centuries, who'd carried out ritualistic assassinations in the name of the Hindu goddess Kali. And we watch as one of those assassinations, carried out by Thuggee high priest Mola Ram, takes place. Shortly following the ceremony, Indy, Shorty, and Willie are found and captured by the Thuggees. And while Shorty's forced to dig alongside the other stolen children for the remaining 2 Shankara stones, as the Thuggee are only in possession of 2 of them, Indy's forced by Mullah Ram to drink the blood of Kali, which puts whoever drinks it into a cursed trance known as the Black Sleep of Kali Ma, as is the case for Indy, who once in the trance, Ram then attempts to have carry out Willie's sacrifice. But fortunately for her, Shorty breaks free of their capture and helps snap Indy out of it by burning him with a torch, allowing them to then take out the Thuggees in their path and rescue Willie, before grabbing the 3 Shankara stones and attempting to escape alongside the village's children. Their escape is nearly thwarted though, as Ram and his men continue pursuing them, but Indy's eventually able to send Ram falling off a cliff and down into the water below, in which he's eaten and killed by crocodiles, while the rest of the cult is killed as well by Captain Blumber and his infantry unit. So, with the Thuggees dealt with, Indy, Willie, Shorty, and the captured children all return to the Indian village, along with the stolen stone, which Indy then returns to the people before sharing a celebratory kiss with Willie. The next of Indy's adventures we see begins about a year later in 1936 South America, where he, along with 2 Peruvian guides, Satipo and Barranca, travels through the jungle in search of the Temple of the Chachapoyan warriors, containing an ancient artifact called the Chachapoyan fertility idol. As the 3 are approaching the temple though, Barranca tries to kill Indy, seeking a larger cut of whatever they get for the idol. But he fails in his attempt as Indy uses his whip to swiftly disarm him, forcing him to flee. So, it's just Indy and Satipo left as they enter the temple, inside of which they successfully manage to avoid multiple lethal traps constructed by the Chachapoyan Indians before finally making it to the idol, which they find sat atop a pressure-sensitive disc. To combat this, Indy attempts to replace the idol just as he picks it up with a bag of sand, but unfortunately, the bag's weight doesn't match that of the idol, and it results in the temple walls beginning to collapse, forcing Indy and Satipo to rush out of there. But in the midst of their escape, Satipo, after convincing Indy to throw him the idol, attempts to leave him behind. But Indy just narrowly manages to make it out and quickly regains possession of the idol from a now dead Satipo, who'd been killed by one of the Chachapoyan's spike traps. Indy's nearly killed as well though, by a giant boulder rolling down from the ceiling towards him. But he ultimately makes it out of the temple alive before suddenly being surrounded by a group of armed Jovidos, under the influence of French archaeologist René-Émile Belloc, a rival of Indy's, who, once taking the idol for himself, orders the tribe to kill him. But Indy manages to avoid them and run off to his pilot, Jock Lindsay, who flies them off to safety. Indy then returns to Connecticut, where he works as an archaeology professor at Marshall College. And there, we're also introduced to one of his closest friends, the dean of students at the school, Dr. Marcus Brody, who we learn is also the director of special acquisitions at the National Museum, to which Indy sells these ancient artifacts he discovers. We're also introduced to a couple of men Marcus brought in to meet with Indy, with those 2 men being Colonel Musgrove and Major Eaton of the US Army, which, they explain, has recently intercepted a German message in which Indy's former professor from his time at the University of Chicago, and who he was close friends with for many years before the 2 had some sort of falling out, Abner Ravenwood, is mentioned, with the message specifically stating, Tanis Development Proceeding, Acquire Headpiece Staff of Ra, Abner Ravenwood, US, which Indy goes on to break down, explaining that the city of Tanis was one of the possible resting places of the Ark of the Covenant, also known as the Lost Ark, a golden and jeweled chest constructed under the guidance of God and Moses that housed the original 10 Commandments carved into stone tablets, and which the Bible claims is capable of leveling mountains and laying waste to entire regions. Originally, the Ark was located in a place called the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, until Jerusalem was invaded around 1980 BC by an Egyptian pharaoh named Shishak, who's believed to have taken the Ark and hidden it in a secret chamber called the Well of Souls within Tanis, before the city was consumed by the desert in a sandstorm sometime later. Indy claims to not be as much of an expert on the subject as Ravenwood, though, who was obsessed with the Ark and the city of Tanis, although he'd never managed to locate either. But Indy believes he must have, at some point, gained possession of the Staff of Ra's headpiece. Hence why the Nazis are looking for him, as if you take the staff with its headpiece to a special room with a miniature of the city laid out on the floor within Tanis, and put it in a certain place at a certain time of day, the sun will shine through the headpiece's crystal and direct a beam down towards the exact location of the Well of Souls on the map. So, to prevent the Nazis from finding the Ark and gaining its power, the two US officials ask Indy to go and track it down first, and he agrees to do so as long as the museum gets the Ark once he's finished the job. To begin his search, he looks to locate Abner Ravenwood through his daughter, Marion Ravenwood, who Indy had entered a brief romantic relationship with during the mid-1920s that resulted in his and Abner's friendship being destroyed. But upon tracking her down at her bar in Nepal, he comes to learn that Abner had passed away. It's not all bad though, as it turns out she's now in possession of the Staff of Ra's headpiece, which she's been wearing as a necklace. But before they can come to an agreement for an exchange, her bar is intruded by a group of German agents who'd followed Indy here, led by Arnold Taut, and Indy's promptly forced into a gunfight against them that he eventually comes out on top of with Marion's help, killing each of them outside of Taut, who manages to escape. Following this attack, Marion decides to join Indy for the rest of his adventure, which next shifts over to Cairo, Egypt, so they can meet with Indy's friend Salah, a skilled Egyptian digger, who reveals that he, along with every other digger in Cairo, has been employed by the German army and their collaborator on the project, René Belloc, to help search for the Well of Souls, which the Nazis are apparently close to finding, having already located the map room. Still though, Indy's one step ahead of them thanks to him being in possession of the headpiece, so he has Salah take him to the map room, inside of which he connects the headpiece to the staff and allows the sunlight to shine through its center, revealing the Well of Souls location, which he and Salah then dig down into and discover is filled with snakes, Indy's biggest fear. They do manage to avoid the snakes though, and eventually find the Ark of the Covenant. But just as the Ark and Salah are sent back up to the surface, they're found by Taut, Belloc, and the German army, who trap Indy and Marion in the vault and capture Salah. Fortunately though, the two are able to find a way out of the well and back out onto land. And once having reunited with Salah, they successfully manage to hijack the truck carrying the Ark and return with it to Cairo, where Salah's arranged for the Chest, Indy, and Marion to board a ship bound for England under Captain Katanga. However, unbeknownst to them, the ship had been followed by the Nazis, who arrive the following morning and finally capture the couple, as well as regain possession of the Ark, which they then take with them to Tabernacle, where they prepare to harness the power of it while Indy and Marion are tied up and forced to watch. But upon opening the chest, things go much differently than they'd expected, as heavenly spirits that quickly transform into demons emerge from within it before the wrath of God is unleashed upon those who dare to look at the secrets of the Ark, resulting in Belloc, Taut, and the Nazis being killed, while Indy and Marion are fortunately spared, having kept their eyes shut throughout the massacre. Indy then returns to the US with the Ark and once again meets with the two US government officials from earlier, who thank him for his services and claim they'll be having their best men research the Ark, which we later see stored in a giant storage facility called Hangar 51. And following this meeting, Indy meets back up and heads out for a drink with Marion, with whom he once again becomes romantically involved, and the two actually make plans of getting married the following year. But shortly after their engagement, Indy began having second thoughts and ultimately decided to break things off, as he felt that Marion wouldn't want to be married to someone who'd be away half the time. Moving ahead to 1938 now, and to the Portuguese coast, in the midst of Indy attempting to retrieve the Cross of Coronado he'd first found 26 years ago from the man in the Panama hat mentioned earlier on board the man's ship, the Vasquez de Coronado. And Indy, after fighting off him and his goons, successfully manages to regain possession of it before jumping over the side of the ship just moments before it explodes as a result of all the TNT stored on it being knocked over by the storm. Indy then makes it back to land before returning to Fairfield, New York, where he now works as a professor at a different university, Barnett College, where he's met by and turns over the cross to Marcus so he can put it in the National Museum. Following the school day, Indy's approached by men working for Walter Donovan, a wealthy industrialist and a collector of antiquities, and who, upon being taken to meet with him, Indy learns requires his services in search for the Holy Grail, the chalice used by Jesus Christ during the Last Supper and which caught his blood at the crucifixion, that according to legend gives whoever drinks from it eternal life. Donovan goes on to explain that, following the crucifixion, the Grail had been entrusted to Joseph of Arimathea, the man who'd buried Jesus' body, before the Grail at some point disappeared and was lost for 1,000 years, until it was once again found by 3 knights, who were also brothers of the First Crusade. 150 years following their discovery of the Grail, 2 of the 3 brothers decided to begin the long journey back to France, but only one of them made it. And before dying of extreme old age, the surviving brother told the tale of his journey and discovery to a Franciscan friar, who then chronicled the knight's story in a manuscript, which we see Donovan is now in possession of. And in it, the friar claimed that there are 2 markers that have been left behind that could reveal the Grail's location, one of which is also in Donovan's possession, while the other is believed to be entombed with the knight's dead brother. Donovan's project leader believed the tomb to be located in Venice, Italy, but before the project leader could complete his journey there, he, along with all of his research, suddenly vanished, so Donovan now wants Indy to pick up where he'd left off, which Indy at first declines to do, but upon learning that the lost project leader is actually his estranged father, Henry Jones Sr., he agrees to help. So he prepares to head over to Venice, but before making the trip, he realizes that he'd been sent a package from Venice earlier. So he opens it with Marcus, and it turns out to be his father's Grail journal that we saw him writing in back when Indy was a kid, containing a complete record of his search for the Holy Grail. And they believe his father must have sent this to him so he could keep it from getting into the wrong hands. Now, with his father's journal to help him in his journey, Indy, along with Marcus, travels to Venice, where they're promptly met by Donovan's associate, Dr. Elsa Schneider, here to help them continue on Indy's father's trail. First by taking them to the library where he was last seen, and eventually, beneath the building, Indy uncovers the knight's tomb with the second marker inside. And this, combined with the first marker, reveals that the Grail is located in the secret canyon of the Crescent Moon in Iskendron. So, Indy sends Marcus to Iskendron to meet with Sala, while he stays back for now so he can first find his father, who he's learned is being held in the castle of Brunwald on the Austrian-German border. But before he gets started on that, he takes a break to enjoy some pleasurable activities with Elsa, who he then heads over to the castle with, which is revealed to actually be a Nazi command center. And there, Indy finds his father. But before they can escape, they're found and captured by the Nazis thanks to Elsa, who it turns out is actually working for them, and she then takes the Grail diary out of Indy's pocket and hands it over to Walter Donovan, who's revealed to also be working with the Nazis. The diary is soon proven useless to them though, as Indy had torn out the pages outlining the Grail's location and given them to Marcus, who the Nazis now shift their focus onto finding. And until they find him, they leave the 2 Joneses tied up. Eventually though, after starting a fire and nearly burning themselves alive while trying to burn through the rope with a lighter, they manage to escape their restraints and the building, in addition to regaining possession of Henry's diary before hopping on the first flight out of Germany, during which Indy takes this opportunity to finally speak with his father about their strained relationship, citing how after his mother passed, Henry rarely spoke to him, and instead prioritized his discoveries. But Henry believes he was a great father, and claims he was just teaching Indy how to rely on himself. The 2 don't get around to resolving any of their past issues by the time they arrive in Iskendron though, where they finally meet up with Sala, who reveals that the Germans had captured Marcus, meaning they now also have the map to the Holy Grail. So the trio heads off to intercept them and finds that they're making their way to the Grail alongside a tank, which Marcus is inside of. Despite the odds appearing not to be in their favor though, they, or more specifically Indy, eventually manages to fight off a few Nazis and free Marcus, before causing the tank to go flying over a cliff. And the now reunited group then begins making their way to the Canyon of the Crescent Moon and inside the Temple of the Sun. But shortly following their arrival, they're found and held at gunpoint by Donovan's men, before Donovan then shoots Henry in the abdomen in an attempt to force Indy to retrieve the Grail for him, since all of his other volunteers had failed to get past the chamber's lethal defensive traps, and Indy agrees to do it so he could potentially use the Grail's healing powers to save his father. Earlier, Henry had explained to Indy what challenges he'd have to go through to reach the Grail, And thanks to that knowledge, Indy's able to get past the traps and enter its chamber, where he meets the third and last surviving knight still guarding the Grail. With the traps disarmed, Donovan and Schneider then also enter the chamber, and see a countless number of grails surrounding them, prompting Donovan to ask the knight which one is the Holy Grail, and the knight explains that they must choose the true Grail, and warns that if they choose incorrectly, the false Grail will kill them. So Donovan has Schneider pick it out for him at her own request, and she hands him a golden jeweled Grail that he promptly drinks from. But it turns out she'd intentionally gave him the false one, having grown sick of his evil acts, and he begins rapidly deteriorating before ultimately becoming nothing but a skeleton, while Indy goes and chooses a Grail himself, which proves to be the true Holy Grail. So he rushes back to his father and uses it to heal his wound. They can't take the Grail with them though, as the knight explains that it cannot pass beyond a marking point inside the temple called the Great Seal, but Elsa decides to try and leave with it anyway, causing the temple to begin crumbling around them, and resulting in Elsa nearly falling into the abyss below before Indy dives down to save her. She continues to reach down towards the Grail though, which is stuck between a crack, and her attempt ultimately results in her falling anyway, never to be seen again. And Indy nearly falls into the abyss as well because of this, but fortunately, he's saved by his father, who he, along with Sala and Marcus, runs out of the canyon with and rides off on horses alongside. 13 years following their journey to the Holy Grail, Indy's father, Henry, would pass away, and a year after that, Marcus Brody would also pass away, who we see later is honored with a statue outside of Marshall College, where Indy, at some point over said 13 years, would return to teaching at. But despite his father and one of his closest friends having gone, Indy still continues on with his adventures in their memory. The next of which we see as Indy and his partner George Mac McHale, who he'd met at some point during the 1940s, are captured while in Mexico by Russian soldiers in 1957 and taken to Nevada, where the US's secret giant storage facility, Hangar 51, is located. There, they're confronted by Colonel Dr. Irina Spalko, who by threatening to kill Mac, forces Indy to help them find a storage container containing mummified remains of an alien creature from a UFO crash in Roswell, Mexico 10 years ago, which it turns out had been examined by a team of researchers that Indy was a part of. Once Indy's brought them to the crate, its contents momentarily distract the Soviets and allow him and Mac to grab hold of a couple of their guns. But he doesn't hold the advantage for long, as it turns out Mac's been secretly working for the Russians. But despite this complication, Indy's still eventually able to escape them and is later found by the FBI. Once back home, Indy's focus is suddenly shifted, as he's later found by a young man named Mutt Williams, revealed to be a close companion of one of Indy's old friends from college, Harold Oxley, with whom he'd had a falling out at some point during the late 1930s, and who we learn helped raise Mutt alongside Mutt's mother, since he was without a biological father. The reason Mutt's come to meet with Indy, though, is because Oxley was recently captured after sending them a letter revealing that he'd discovered a crystal skull and was preparing to take it to a mythical lost city in the Amazon called Akator, which Mutt's mother felt sounded like he'd gone crazy, so she went to find him and ended up captured as well. She did momentarily manage to escape though, and called up Mutt, explaining that she'd be sending him another of Ox's letters and that he'll need to find Indiana Jones for help decoding it. Upon learning of Oxley's search for Akator, Indy goes on to explain that, supposedly 7,000 years ago, the Uga tribe were chosen by the gods to build the city, from which, legend says, a crystal skull was stolen in the 15th or 16th century, and that whoever returns the skull to the city temple will be given control of its powers, hence why someone's captured Oxley. It turns out, though, that Oxley was no longer in possession of the skull, as Indy learns through his letter, which Ox had written in an extinct Latin American language called Coyoma, that he'd hid it somewhere near the Nazca lines in Peru. Giant ancient drawings carved into the desert floor. So the two head over to Peru and learn that Oxley was actually thrown into their sanatorium briefly for raving like a madman, before men with guns came and took him. And inside his cell, they find another clue as to where exactly the skull may be, through drawings on the floor of the cemetery where conquistador Francisco de Orellana, who disappeared into the Amazon looking for Akator around 1546, was buried. So they travel there next and find within his tomb the crystal skull hidden behind his mummified remains. But as they exit the tomb, they find themselves surrounded by Irina Spalko, Mac, and the Soviets, who are revealed to have been the ones who'd captured Oxley and Mutt's mother, and who then take the two to their Soviet camp in the jungle, where they have the captured Oxley, who's lost control of his mind as a result of looking into the skull's eyes for too long, and Mutt's mother, who's revealed to actually be Indy's former lover, Marion, who shortly following their reunion, reveals to them that Mutt is actually Indy's son, Henry Jones III. Before they can work on their family dynamics though, Indy's forced into translating ideograms Oxley had drawn, and they turn out to be directions to Akator. So the Russians begin making their way to its believed location with their 4 hostages, until said 4 hostages manage to break free of their restraints and begin taking them out one by one. During which Indy gets the opportunity to confront Mac for betraying him, but it turns out Mac is supposedly a double agent working for the CIA. So once having regained Indy's trust, the two, Mutt, Marion, and Oxley, gain control of one of the Russians' vehicles, regain possession of the Crystal Skull, and make their way to Akator. Once there, the group soon finds the Temple of Akator, filled with artifacts from every era of early history, as well as a bunch of gold, which specifically catches the eye of Mac, who collects as much of it as he can before him and the others then enter a tunnel and discover 13 crystal skeletons sitting in gold thrones, still awaiting the return of the stolen skull, as although in separate bodies, they share a single mind. Before Oxley can place the skull back onto the skeleton with no head though, Mac pulls a gun on them and reveals that he lied about working with the CIA, before Spalko then enters the chamber as well, takes the skull from Oxley, and brings it to the skeleton herself. And upon the skull being reconnected to the body, the interdimensional being awakens and offers a reward to Spalko, who demands to know everything they know. So the being begins telepathically transferring all of its knowledge into her mind as the chamber begins to rotate, allowing the skeletons to combine into a reanimated alien, while an interdimensional portal opens above them, prompting Indy, Mutt, Marion, and a once again sane Oxley to rush out of there, while Mac ultimately gets sucked into the portal along with the Soviets while attempting to leave with some gold. And Spalko, unable to handle this overwhelming amount of knowledge, is killed as her mind and body begin to disintegrate, before the city is then destroyed as well, just as Indy and the rest of the group make it out of the temple, when a giant spacecraft suddenly takes off from the base. With their search for Akator brought to a close, the group then return home, with Indy heading back to Connecticut and Marshall College, where he's been promoted to Associate Dean under his friend and Dean of Students, Charles Stanforth. And we later see that Indy and Marion have finally decided to complete their marriage, with Mutt having openly accepted him as his father. And that was everything you needed to know before watching Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful in any way, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And also, let us know in the comments below how excited you are for the new film. Once again though, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.